Hello and welcome back to another episode from Driving Britain. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Today we're going to be looking at a story of YouTube's propaganda and how that's being used nowadays. What do I mean by propaganda? Well, I mean company propaganda, sales. So now it's been argued that some of the more prominent YouTube channels have been taking sponsorship from different companies and promoting those companies using quite dubious sort of tactics and manipulating what they do and don't say and show to promote the interest of the company rather than just giving a fair review as it appears. Now, we kind of know that this goes on to some extent anyway, but I don't think you realise just how much it goes on. We're going to look at a video where somebody's looking at one particular channel. They're looking at Veritasium, which is one of the biggest channels on YouTube, and I've watched thousands of hours of their videos myself, so I'm quite interested to see what he comes up with to show, or to at least insinuate, that Veritasium might be sparing with the information that they put out during a video. I think that might be the least suitable way to say that. After all, we do live in that kind of society, so everybody needs to be careful about what they say and how they word their comments, especially me. Now, before we go any further, sponsors on channels. It's an integral part of how YouTube functions. The amount of money that YouTubers make from YouTube in the early years of their channel especially is almost zero. It doesn't even cover the cost of a single microphone, let alone all of the thousands of pounds worth of equipment and time and everything else. So for the smaller channels especially ones like ours where we're really small channels, then you absolutely rely on sponsorship. Not that affects us because we're not sponsored by anybody, and to make things worse, most of our videos, because we do bring you these controversial sort of stories and show you stuff that other channels won't show you, it means that videos that we do put on, most of them, they just end up being demonetized by YouTube because there's something that contravenes one of the clauses in YouTube. But because we want to just give you the best viewing pleasure possible and show you the funniest or the most interesting or the most factual stuff possible, then we just go right ahead and we make it and we put it out anyway, even though we make nothing from it. We don't even make money from the adverts on most of the videos on our channel. So if you do want to sponsor us, then you go right ahead, because we really do need it. But no, sponsorships overall, most channels need it so that they can kind of move themselves up that stage. And then when you get to be a really big channel, then you make an awful lot of money from YouTube, and you also make an awful lot of money from sponsorships. Now that's what kind of, that's the deal, that's the way it works. But that middle sector, they especially rely on YouTube sponsors. So I don't want you to look at any YouTube channel that's been sponsored thinking they've just got an ulterior motive, because that's not what's been said at all, and that definitely isn't the majority. We're on about a few isolated cases, and it seems to be headed more towards the most prominent channels on YouTube. So enough of me, let's see what this guy's got to say.
About science, education, YouTube, and most importantly, money. It's a story about what happens when the desire to educate comes into conflict with the desire to get paid. Finally, it's a story about how some of the most valuable companies in the world are using educational YouTube as a vector for misinformation.
Yeah, and that's the crux of why we're making this, why we're showing this now, why we're bringing it to you, because we know that we're probably going to end up demonetized again. There's bound to be something. But when you view most of these channels, you think that everything that you're being told is factual as much as the presenter or the group doing the video can give you. You think it's a balanced argument. But if it turns out that that's not the case, then that's a really bad thing. If you know it's not the case from the outset, then that's fine. But when we're talking about trusted channels where you believe everything that they're telling you, you're relying upon them almost as a serious output of information, then that's when we start to cross the line. And that's why these sort of videos need to be made.
And to unpack all of this, we're going to talk about one of the biggest science channels on the platform, Veritasium.
The Surfshark sponsor is from the original video from Tom Nicholas. The link's in description. That's not somebody who's sponsoring us, because we're, as I said earlier, not being sponsored. We're just putting out the video because we want you to know about these things.
The science YouTube channel Veritasium released a video titled "Why You Should Want Driverless Cars on Roads Now." It featured the channel's host and founder, Derek Muller, making a characteristically compelling argument for the embrace of autonomous vehicles. Attempting to debunk the anxieties some people feel about having driverless cars loose on public roads, Muller asserts that self-driving vehicles are actually far safer than their human-driven alternatives, and have the potential to both save lives and greatly improve contemporary urban life. A large part of the video is delivered from the backseat of one of a fleet of driverless taxis currently operated in Phoenix, Arizona by Waymo, the successor to Google's self-driving car project. All in all, it amounts to a glowing review of currently existing driverless car technology in general, and Waymo's implementation of that technology in particular. Muller so thoroughly punctures any concerns that one might have about autonomous vehicles that it's hard not to come away from the video as an enthusiastic evangelist for self-driving cars. For a YouTube channel which derives its name from the Latin word for truth, to be able to make a video which is so uncompromisingly positive, so lacking in caveats or caution, must be reflective of a highly refined technology, right? Well, no. It's actually reflective of little more than the size of Waymo's PR budget.
Yeah, my general experience is if something's been shown and no bad points are being mentioned, then that's usually an indication that something not right is going on. No matter how good any product or technology is, there's always problems. Nothing's absolutely perfect.
For, as Muller admits 30 seconds in, this is a sponsored video, paid for by Waymo and very clearly designed to contribute to their present PR strategy. To describe the video as an advert is perhaps to slightly miss the point. The primary goal here isn't to promote Waymo's taxi service to potential customers. That's only actually available to unvetted members of the public in a handful of Phoenix suburbs, so most people can't use it anyway. Instead, the video is a more general attempt to reassure viewers about a technology that has been attracting some increasingly negative headlines. In December 2020, Uber lost confidence in its long-standing dream of automating its ride-hailing service and sold its self-driving car division to a competitor. A few months later, the poster child for techno-optimism, Elon Musk, similarly revealed that he didn't expect it to be so hard to implement full self-driving capabilities in Tesla vehicles. And in May of this year, embarrassment came knocking.
I didn't realise that so many groups were bailing out of the self-driving car sort of group. I thought that it was moving forward. I didn't realise that there's still so many problems with it. I knew there's obviously problems with it. I know it doesn't particularly work, but I thought that it was just, just the speed of the research rather than because groups are actually bailing for it. I didn't know that such big groups especially are dropping out of it.
Waymo's own door, when a video circulated online of one of its self-driving taxis getting confused by some traffic cones, blocking 2 lanes of traffic, and then trying to escape the support team that came to the aid of the trapped passenger. Such stories have combined with a steady drip of crashes and near crashes involving cars with self-driving capabilities.
Yeah, that's not a good advert, is it?
Some people feel that driverless vehicles might be, at best, an overly ambitious pipe dream, and at worst, potentially quite dangerous.
If anybody's seen any type of computer or robot system trying to emulate a human, you will know just how almost impossible it is. The human brain really is one of the most ingenious things on the earth. The amount of things that it can process, the speed that it can process. So, we're not talking about just complex algorithms, we're on about everyday things, so much stimuli all thrown into one, and we just take it in our stride as we're walking down a road or messing up a sentence. But seriously, the human brain, it's not an easy feat to try and replicate what we do when we drive. To believe that a system can be created to emulate all of those parts. I think it's just a really big tall order. I don't know whether we're ever really going to reach a stage where we can have 100% self-driving car without any need for concern and with 100% no fault ratio. I just don't think we're ever going to reach that sort of stage. I know it's aside from what this video is actually about, but you've got to look at the whole campaign and why Veritasium were showing what they were to understand this whole propaganda thing. So I know that it seems like we're going off on a bit of a tangent and we're talking about kind of two subjects at once, but it's because you've got to see the whole picture, because there's no point us just me or the original guy just saying, oh, we think that these groups are doing this and this is why they're doing it. You need to actually see it for yourself. And yeah, I've looked through about half of this video and I came across a part about halfway through where I thought, I've seen exactly that happen, but with a different channel, and that's what made me stop watching a particular channel, which I'll come to when we get to it. But that's why we're kind of taking a bit of a roundabout way on showing you what we're kind of really getting at. So stick with us.
In September 2021, Morning Consult revealed that the share of US adults who believe autonomous vehicles are safer than regular cars had fallen by 5 points to just 22%. It's no surprise that Waymo, which is currently looking to expand its experimental taxi service to new cities, would want to push back on these perceptions.
So yeah, that's really what's coming down to that video being made by Veritasium and all of the other main YouTube channels and stuff that took it on. It's the fact that a lot of prominent companies were bailing out of the self-driving car sort of schemes, selling off what they'd got. And the one group that were not just trying to run ahead with it, but were trying to release taxis for it and get it grounded into certain states and stuff, they really had twice the fight on their hand, didn't they? And that's why they turned to these YouTube channels, which is where it brings us to Veritasium and a few others.
Opposition to self-driving cars gained too much traction, then securing permits to test these vehicles on public roads is likely to become much more difficult. That they might turn to a YouTube channel as part of their pushback campaign might, until just a few years ago, have seemed much less likely. Nevertheless, those of you that have watched some of my previous videos or who follow me on Twitter will know that I've been keeping an eye on this growing trend of companies, billionaires and elite institutions using sponsorship deals with purportedly educational channels to promote their own highly selective and self-interested vision of the world for some time. Earlier this year, we took a look at a video by ex-Vox journalist Johnny Harris to foreground this emergent practice in which a creator goes beyond integrating a brief advert for a product or service into their video and turns off their critical faculties entirely, working with a company or institution to craft a video which, from start to finish, is little more than corporate propaganda. Now,
yeah, exactly. That's the real crux of this, isn't it? If there's a YouTuber or a channel or anything, TV advert, any of them, if you know it's just purely an advert, then that's fine. That's exactly what you're expecting to see. But if you're, say if you're watching the news and then you start to get, I don't know, coffee cups from Costa start to be shown on the side of the screen, or somebody mentions how they can't wait to get off work and go to get their Starbucks or something like that, you know that it's a plug. On a news group, you really wouldn't expect to see that. And these YouTube sort of channels, where they're science-based channels, they pretty much only deal in fact with a bit of humour. So when they start to stray away from that, you don't know that they're doing it, and you don't expect them to be doing it because it's not what their entire history is built on. And that's what this guy's trying to kind of get across, I think.
After all, I don't think we owe it to creators who make these wholly sponsored fluff pieces to engage with the minutiae of their arguments. Whatever the merits of Veritasium's other work, and there are many, the choices surrounding what information to include in this particular video are not being made with reference to what will leave viewers with the most rounded understanding of autonomous vehicles, but instead with
That's exactly, isn't it? A rounded understanding. And that's exactly what you'd expect to get from a channel like Veritasium. If they're going to review something, even if they're not making it as a review video, they're just giving it a try, you still kind of interpret it as a review video. You expect a completely rounded argument. And when you're not getting a rounded argument, but you think you are, that's when you're being deceived and cheated. And that's when I think that we've stepped into something that's really not on.
With reference to Waymo's current PR goals. This is, in short, a completely disingenuous and unserious contribution to the debate around driverless cars. That being said, I often struggle to convince others of this. Often as a result of the goodwill that creators have built up over the years, people might accept that a sponsorship tips the scales a tiny bit, but will be hesitant to believe that an entire video could be completely worthless.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say earlier. You expect them to be leaning a little bit towards the advertiser or sponsor because they are a sponsor. You've got to kind of be a bit kind to them. You're not going to outright crush their product or anything. But at the same time, you think that you're getting a fairly balanced argument. You think it's 60-40 at the worst, not 100% zero.
In fact, Muller himself sums up many people's attitudes towards these kinds of corporate partnerships when, following his revelation that the Veritasium video is sponsored by Waymo, he gives a little shrug, as if to say, no big deal.
Oh, but full disclosure, this video is sponsored by Waymo.
Today then, we are going to engage with the arguments put forward in why you should want driverless cars on roads now. We're going to look at Muller's invocation of dubious comparisons with other technologies, his misrepresentation of statistics, and the highly selective approach he takes to discussing the capabilities of Waymo's vehicles.
And this is going to be the crux of the argument, isn't it? Because if you're going to say that a channel like Veritasium is not just being sponsored by a product, but they're actually advertising the product, or they're making out they're just running a normal sort of video, then you've got to back it up. So it'll be interesting to see exactly how he backs up his argument here.
What we'll find is that while the video doesn't contain any outright falsehoods, its central argument relies on Muller being extremely careful about what he does and doesn't say. By the end of the video, hopefully you'll have a sense of how damaging these pieces can be to our collective understanding of the world, why we should be skeptical of anyone who describes themselves as an educator involving themselves in the creation of such content, and why we should resist the further normalization of such practices.
Yeah, we get enough of that from the news networks and politics. We really don't need it from our trusted YouTube channels. Because, okay, they are just YouTube channels. We're not seeing it as a news network, but at the same time, if you trust what they're saying because they've built up that trust over a lot of years, then you need to be able to trust them. And if you can't trust them, then we have a right to know about that.
To reiterate, while we're going to be focusing primarily on Veritasium's partnership with Waymo today, Muller and his team are far from the only science, tech and/or educational YouTubers to periodically give corporate sponsors the opportunity to influence the editorial content of their videos. In fact, the video we're discussing today was itself just one part of a larger PR campaign in which Waymo recruited 5 YouTube channels and tasked them with creating videos which would push back against declining trust in self-driving cars. Some of these channels helpfully included some screen recordings of what one of the creators described as a round table and what others might try to characterize as a press event, but comparing extracts from the event to the resulting videos seems to have involved little more than Waymo staff briefing the sponsored creators on what to include in their videos. The uploads which resulted from this campaign varied depending on the size, resources and styles of the channels making them. Shannon Morse's video simply involves her talking to camera with the occasional bit of stock footage overlaid to keep things visually interesting. The video released by Snazzy Labs favours showing clips from the briefing event itself, allowing Waymo specialists to explain how the company's vehicles operate in their own words. By far the most entertaining video is by Jason Silver, largely because of how sensationalist and ridiculously superlative laden the whole thing is. Silver also doesn't seem to entirely understand the technology that he's been told to talk about, and so is reduced to drawing upon Arthur C. Clarke to describe self-driving cars as indistinguishable from magic. The Veritasium video is clearly that which has had the most time and resource pumped into it. This is reflective of both the channel being much more established than the others, and presumably the much larger payment that would therefore have come attached to the sponsorship deal. Interestingly, where other channels have apparently been asked to include the hashtag Waymo ambassador, either in the description to their videos or in the video itself, the team at Veritasium appears to have negotiated that term away. And this is interesting, in that it hints at a desire to not want to be seen to be too close to the company the video will discuss, even if the content of the video itself remains dubious. What really sets the...
I saw something like this myself a couple of years ago. If you remember, about 2 years ago, we started to get a lot of adverts on YouTube about DNA testing. Well, one of the channels that I used to watch was Smarter Every Day. And it's established by a guy who kind of always included his kids in the video, and a real kind of down-to-earth, grounded sort of guy, just trying to explain pretty complicated things in a really fun sort of way. It was a great channel, hours and hours worth of, thousands of hours of footage and stuff. I saw him do a DNA type one, and he's saying, I got this advert through the post, so I thought I'll follow it up. And then you see him at the centre giving his DNA, and then you see them all at home going through all the stuff and how fantastic it is and all that sort of thing. And I thought, quite interesting. I'm not sure it's something I'll probably do, but quite interesting. And I thought, he gave the impression that it was just something that he had just kind of got through the post and thought, I'll take that up. Let's have a look at it. It seems like a good idea. We can find out if we've got any illnesses. We're doing it for the kids type idea. But then I watched another YouTube channel a couple of days later that was also a pretty big channel. And they had the exact same thing. Almost word for word, the entire script, the whole process. And then over the next kind of month or so, I saw it come up another 3 or 4 times with pretty big channels. So a channel where, the Smarter Everyday channel, I thought that it was exactly the same as Veritasium. I thought that everything that I was seeing was, they might have sponsors, but whatever you're seeing, whatever you're being given is just, as close to the truth as they can kind of get across to you, or as much as they know it. They might be laid a little bit towards, promoting whoever's sponsoring them, but only a little bit. Not just an outright advert for that company, and that's exactly what they did. So I've seen this myself before, and I've seen it quite a few times. It's just that I didn't realise it was such a big thing or such a big problem, and I didn't know that it was happening on a whole multitude of different topics right across the board. Now, this guy's going in depth about Veritasium and highlighting this one particular kind of story problem to explain it all out and show how it's happening, and to show without any doubt that it is happening. But I know myself that it's not just this one case, it's not just this one driverless cars. I've seen it with quite a few other products. The one that springs to mind and the other big channel that springs to mind is what I've just been talking about. But this is certainly not a one-off, and it's pretty bad, really. In fact, I've not watched their channel since because of it, because I think it's just outrageous.
The Veritasium video apart is that it is the only sponsored video in this campaign in which someone actually rides in a Waymo car. And notably, this does not work in the video's favour. In an attempt to showcase the car's ability to deal with tricky situations, Muller instructs it to drive through a car park.
What I want to see here is, how does it handle a parking lot?
In the event, there aren't actually any other moving vehicles around. Nevertheless, there is a person pushing a trolley along the pavement. Despite this person being a decent distance away and being well within the bounds of the pavement, the car comes to a screeching halt. The wheels actually squeal, it's so abrupt.
Whoa, that was a sudden stop.
Muller tries to turn this into a positive, using it as an opportunity to talk about how the Waymo software calculates various different possibilities of what might happen in any given scenario. Ultimately though, it's not convincing. one is left to wonder whether the software's reasoning is so uncertain that it stops every time it sees a person on the pavement, just in case.
That's like what I was trying to say earlier about how much the human brain processes. You know, you're not just driving a car and interpreting all things around you, it's also when hazards pop up, how to interpret that properly. And trying to get a technology to do that, it's just such a big leap. There's so much involved with it that I'm not sure that it's even close to being flawless.
In case they leap out into the road. While the Veritasium video may be a more accomplished production than those released by the other creators involved in this campaign, however, the key talking points remain broadly the same. Throughout each of the videos, the same statistics, many of which we'll critique later, crop up time and again. We repeatedly hear about how 94% of serious road accidents in the US are caused by human drivers. More about that figure later. And how the Waymo software has driven a cumulative 20 million miles. More about that figure later too. Several of the same cutesy anecdotes are repeated by different creators. In fact,
yeah, that's the same sort of thing as what I was seeing with the DNA ones. You could tell that it was scripted and that they'd been given, a dozen facts or a dozen sets of information that they had to portray in the videos. And some of them managed to run it quite naturally. Like in the Smarter Everyday video, it did seem really natural. It seemed like it was just a genuine thing, and I didn't suspect it for a single moment. But that's because I 100% trusted everything he was saying was, just a general rounded thing. I didn't think I was watching Advert. I thought I was watching a channel about a current topic with rounded information, both sides or all parts of the argument. Even if he wasn't giving all parts of the argument, if they just kind of was blatant about, well, actually, we're just going to be advertising this product. They've sent it us free saying, look, will you advertise it? And we thought, yeah, why not? We'll give it a go. We get to try it at the same time as making a little bit of money for advertising it. If they did that even, then we still wouldn't care. We'd still watch it because, we kind of want to know about the product or what's going on. It's when there's deceit involved. That's when it completely changes everything.
If one watches through all 5 videos, one finds clips of Waymo employees at the briefing event priming the creators with talking points, which later crop up in videos by the other channels, framed as opinions that the hosts have come to of their own accord. Now, it would be entirely possible to scrutinise Veritasium's contribution to this PR campaign by playing through the video in question and ridiculing it for its general cheesiness. There's one moment, for example, where, having supposedly come to the end of his planned ride in the Waymo vehicle, Muller is apparently having so much fun that he just can't bear to get out. He therefore calls the support team and arranges to extend his ride.
I just completed my ride, but I don't want to get out of the car. I just want to keep driving. Is there a way that I can do that?
Putting aside the weirdness of the fact that extending his ride involves him having to get out of the car, wait for it to drive around the block, and then come back and pick him up again.
I just left all my stuff in the car. I hope it comes back.
Are we really supposed to believe that the initial plan for the day's filming was for him to just be left on some random residential street in Phoenix? Nevertheless, while the silliness of this presentational veneer is worth noting, what I'm really interested in today are the more sincere arguments that the video makes for the swift and widespread adoption of driverless cars, and the statistics and anecdotes which supposedly substantiate those arguments. For some people might posit that sponsored videos like this can be a win-win for viewers and the sponsoring companies. Viewers are able to gain an insight into emerging technologies, the argument might go, whilst companies are able to increase their brand recognition. Digging into the claim.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you think you're watching, like with the DNA one that I was on about before. You know that they're kind of making some money because of the advert if they're being sponsored by them. I mean, I don't even think that they mentioned on the DNA one that they were being sponsored. I think that they just made out that it was just something that they just came through the post, and so they thought, oh, well, let's follow this up. I don't think there's even that much kind of declaration on it. But even when they are sponsored, you need to be told exactly what's going on. Especially with YouTube, there's so many clauses around advertising and sponsorship on YouTube anyway. It seems all the more ridiculous that this would be happening.
Claims that Muller makes in this video, however, destroys this premise entirely, with any claims to education being swiftly overshadowed by mountains of corporate fluff and misinformation. We can finally get on to examining some of the claims that are made about Waymo's self-driving cars within it. As mentioned previously, the video kicks off with the channel's host, Derek Muller, acknowledging the sponsorship deal with Waymo before climbing into the back of one of the company's vehicles and setting off on his ride around the
Yeah, because this is going to be at the crux of his argument, really, isn't it? Because if he's saying, I can show to you without question that this is happening, then he's got to back that argument up, and this is where he's going to be hopefully doing it. Because even though I know that what he's saying is true because I've seen it myself, but you might not have noticed it, you might not have come across it, or you may have seen it and just not realised that's what you're seeing. So this is where everybody kind of benefits from seeing that it's definitely happening.
Phoenix suburbs. Finally, at just over a minute in, he begins to build the foundations of his argument. The preconception at the heart of this video is that self-driving cars are underdeveloped, can occasionally be dangerous, and that we should therefore be cautious in how and when we allow them to be used. Muller evidences the prevalence of this view through showing us the results of a YouTube community poll, which revealed that 40% of Veritasium's audience believes that self-driving car technology wouldn't be ready for at least another 10 years.
Yeah, I think it's probably
highlighting the
about
lack
right.
of a driver in the moving vehicle that he's sat in, Muller makes it clear that his goal in this video will be to prove those doubters wrong.
And for those people, I have news, which is that, well, there is no driver in this car.
Following a brief potted history of Waymo, and
Which is a pretty strong
interestingly
argument.
long before his frankly dubious explanation of how the company's vehicles work, Muller's first approach to doing so is to foreground two other ways in which automation is used in our lives which may have once been seen as alarming or dangerous, but which most people now routinely accept as safe. He begins with lifts, or elevators to our American friends, suggesting that concerns surrounding self-driving cars can be likened to the public response to the introduction of automated elevators.
When people started putting in driverless elevators, well, the public was very concerned and they didn't want to ride in those elevators.
Now, this obviously isn't a very good comparison. As Muller quickly admits, elevators only have to travel in one dimension, and a lift shaft is a highly controlled environment relative to the multitude uncertainties of public roads. Interestingly, this section is also entirely plagiarized. A quick Google search reveals it to have been lifted beat for beat from a 2015 Planet Money interview with architectural historian Lee Gray. We won't have time to go into Veritasium's somewhat disingenuous approach to referencing and citing evidence for this video today. However, it just seems unnecessarily rude not to have credited the source here.
Yeah, I think it's a bit odd that he's trying to even compare a lift or elevator to a self-driving car. It's not even like they're in the same stratosphere, is it? So it's a bit odd that he even used that as his example anyway, let alone after nicking it from someone and not even citing them for it.
Muller's second choice of comparison is more successful, though not for the reasons that he thinks it is. He continues by discussing Autoland, the automated guidance system that is used to land aeroplanes in conditions of low visibility.
I saw that.
Yeah, even that's not completely automated. That's not like a self-driving car. There's an awful lot that goes into those systems, and only part of it is automated.
This particular landing where a plane is coming into Vienna and it's just so foggy that the pilots can see almost nothing. I mean, this is the view from the cockpit. And yet they make a textbook landing right on target. So how do they do it? The answer is the pilots didn't do it. It was a Cat 3 auto land procedure. The plane just came in and landed itself, essentially.
The automation of plane landings is obviously far more complex and therefore impressive than the operation of an elevator. The problem with using it to make the case for the rollout of driverless cars is that Autoland is far more limited and requires the involvement of many more human beings than Muller cares to mention. For one, the suggestion that the plane landed itself ignores the fact that a good deal of the technology which makes these landings possible is on the ground. Those of you that have flown to or from large airports may have noticed an array of antennae at the end of the runway.
I don't know if any of you remember the early kind of days of adverts for self-driving cars, and you used to see them in big open car parks and look like sets of, not cones, but those round discs type things that you put on a football field when you're playing soccer with your mates or football with your mates, those round kind of half spherical cap type things. They used to have those in like an S shape around a car park, and they had GPS fitted in with them, and then the car would slowly snake its way through. And that's pretty much the limit of how the self-driving car was going at the time. But that's pretty much how planes land, exactly like that. They're guided in by the equivalent of those little GPS caps.
Collectively, these are called the localizer, and they essentially fire out a beam which, alongside other systems, guides the plane
exactly
to
like
the
that,
centre of the runway. The result is that autoland procedures can only be accomplished at certain airports that have this kit. It's far from a case of the plane simply responding to the environment around it. Additionally, autoland involves a lot of human input. There are several videos on YouTube of pilots flying the exact same model of plane.
There's two big things here, aren't there? One, we don't have, those transmitters running all the way around. We don't have any type of guidance system around all of the streets through all of the cities for these cars to follow. They're doing it just by GPS, and that's only part of it. Them following a route, that's not really the problem. It's all the things they encounter during the route that's the problem. And secondly, if planes could be landed purely automated without any input from the human, and the human didn't even need to be there, how quick do you think airlines would have dropped the pilot? Or at least cut them down to just one person? They just wouldn't be paying that sort of wage if they thought they could do without the people. Or at the least of it, they'll give them a bed to sit on board with and just make them do twice the amount of flights, knowing that they're never really going to need to do anything, but they're there just in case there's an emergency. That technology is just not there. The reason why he couldn't show an example of a flawless system like what the self-driving car would need to use is because no such thing exists, including with the self-driving car, which is why they're not all over every single road right now. The technology just isn't there. I know that's not what this video is about, but that's kind of part of the story here, isn't it?
Featured in the clip that Muller shows us, and
what our video's
watching
about,
them, one finds it to be an incredibly involved process. They're not even just monitoring the landing either. Pilots are actively involved in adjusting the speed of the aircraft, the flaps, deploying the landing gear, and much more. And this is before we consider the huge number of people involved in monitoring and making safe both the airspace and the runway. As we'll see later, these geographical limitations and the involvement of significant numbers of human beings actually makes Autoland pretty comparable to Waymo's vehicles. And admitting these caveats doesn't make the technology any less impressive. Unfortunately, at least in part due to the video being sponsored by Waymo, Muller is hell-bent on both pretending that automation technology is more capable than it actually is, and on pretending that human involvement in its operation, rather than being essential, has the potential to be fatal. In a pretty distasteful turn, the video draws our attention to the case of Asiana Airlines Flight 214.
When Asiana Airlines Flight 214 was on final approach to San Francisco, attempting to manually land the plane, the pilot accidentally left the throttle at 0, and by the time they realized and tried to abort the landing, it was too late. The plane crashed into the runway seawall and split in two.
The implication of Muller's version of events is that the pilots of Flight 214 were too egotistical to make use of automated systems in landing the plane, and that if they had done so, the crash could have been avoided. The problem is that the pilots were making use of automated systems in the form of what's called an auto-throttle. More than this, the official investigation placed the onus for the crash on that very technology. On publishing the final report, the acting chairman of the investigating body told the BBC that, in their efforts to compensate for the unreliability of human performance, the designers of automated control systems have unwittingly created opportunities for new error types that can be even more serious than those they were seeking to avoid. To use the crash...
Yeah, and that's kind of at the crux of why self-driving cars is such a difficult thing to achieve, because of exactly that. You kind of, you see an obstacle, like a person standing at the side of the road, so you have the car become aware of it. But then it's how it responds from there on, and all of the other decisions it needs to make based on that decision. And it's such a big snowball effect. That's why it's just too complex for technology to really kind of grasp in a straightforward sort of way. You have to make a lot of assumptions and also discount a lot of things, but getting it to know and envisaging every single scenario to know what to tell it to ignore or to account for, it's just such a lot of stuff. It's just really, really difficult, and that's why we're just not near it, not anywhere near as close to it as what him sitting in the back of the car being driven around the city gives the impression of anyway. But again, let's kind of be aware that this video itself is on about the whole kind of propaganda part of it, so we're not evaluating self-driving cars. It's just that this is part of the story, so we're going to talk about it, we're going to include it.
Crash of Flight 214 as proof that autonomy is good and humans bad then is frankly ludicrous. This tragic episode is an argument for more caution, not less. There is
Yeah, the other thing is, I think that using tragedy as a way to sell a product, in an underhand sort of way at least, is a really despicable thing, isn't it?
A brilliant discussion to be had about what other implementations of automated and autonomous technology can teach us about how, why, when and where we as a society might want to deploy driverless cars. Unfortunately, again, at least in part due to the sponsoring relationship with Waymo, the Veritasium video chooses to do away with such nuance. By misrepresenting automated systems as more capable than they actually are, the video implies hesitancy over driverless cars to be entirely irrational. And in the next part of the video, Muller doubles down on this argument. We're going to largely skip over a couple of sections of the Veritasium video. In the first, Muller explains the 5 levels of autonomous driving, and in a barely concealed dig at Tesla's autopilot function, suggests that the supposed safety benefits of driverless cars only kick in once you reach full autonomy.
All these drivers were trusting the technology too much, which makes almost fully autonomous vehicles potentially more dangerous than regular cars. So this is why Waymo decided that the only safe way to proceed is with a car that has at least level 4 autonomy.
Footage from the Snazzy Labs video, which also makes the same point in exactly the same way, suggests that this potshot at Tesla is drawn entirely from the briefing with Waymo staff. The following section sees Muller take a tour around Waymo's depot and offices. This is fairly unremarkable, although it is the one part of the video where we get a hint.
Yeah, just seeing them kind of repeating the different bits there, and them all showing the same type of clips from where it was obviously pushed to them by the company that was getting them to advertise. It does remind me again back to the DNA one, and I remember some really identical type bits of footage coming up. And I'm wondering in the back of my mind whether some of them were even filmed kind of on the same day. A whole group of people led round and kind of all given their little bit of airtime. Just the same as you see, different collabs where people go together. You might have 2 people recording in the same area and then you get them recording together and so on. Well, I'm even wondering if they even did that, which would be even worse, wouldn't it?
At the considerable number of human beings required to ensure that Waymo's taxi service is safe.
This is the depot where the cars go when they're not on the road, and it's also where people monitor all the rides in progress.
There is then a bit more vlog-style footage, as well as the beginnings of an interview with the woman in charge of Waymo's ride-hailing operations, who, unsurprisingly, thinks Waymo is great. With all this over and done with, Muller returns to the central argument of his video, that self-driving cars are safer than their human-driven alternatives. This time, however, rather than trying to convince us that autonomy is safe, he settles for arguing that human drivers are less capable than we might like to think. This section...
That's a pretty easy thing to argue, isn't it? I think most of us that drive know that there are many drivers, and sometimes including ourselves, that are just horrendous. There are a lot of really, really bad drivers out there. It's not necessarily always down to their driving ability, usually just down to lack of attention. But sometimes it's just down to the fact that they just didn't learn to drive quite as well as other people in the area or something like that, and so they're visiting the area, their standards show out a little bit different. I'm sure that we've all seen things like that. So trying to show that humans are potentially pretty bad at driving and have accidents all the time, that's an easy thing to show because we know it happens. But there's still a big leap from saying that we should just trust automated systems because the technology is there when it's not.
Is a bit death by statistics.
Surveys show 74% of people believe they are above average drivers. In the 20th century, 60 million people were killed on the road. That's basically an extra world war's worth of deaths. The National Transportation and Safety Board has identified human error as the cause of 94% of accidents.
Unlike in most of their other videos, Veritasium doesn't provide any sources for these figures, and a brief use of a search engine gives some indication as to why this might be. The figure suggesting that 74% of drivers believe themselves to be above average appears reputable, having come from a short 2003 article in the Journal of Safety Research. After this, however, things become more questionable. The idea that 60 million people were killed on the road in the 20th century and the comparison to World War II is lifted straight from Wikipedia. Wikipedia in turn cites an infographic produced by Information is Beautiful in 2012 to accompany an exhibition at the Wellcome Collection in London. The infographic's creators acknowledged at the time that there may be some inevitable double counting, broad estimations, and ballpark figures.
In other words, completely made up to make it look good.
And consulting the spreadsheet which details the origins of each statistic, one finds road traffic accidents to be one of those causes of death for which no source is cited. This therefore appears to be a cautionary tale about relying too heavily.
Yeah, plus are we talking about people that's died while driving a car, people that's been run into, people that have died because of a malfunction on the car, which isn't human error, or people that were in the road and got run over because they stepped out into the road? You know, all figures like that are always very dubious, and you've usually got to look at who's put the information out there and what were the motives for putting that information out there. Usually it's by the Driving Standards Agency or someone like that, and it's because they want to lower speed limits or impose another charge or something like that. So it's always best to be pretty cautious when dealing with any statistics, and especially ones that might have a motivation behind them.
On Wikipedia. Whilst it might reveal a slightly
dubious
research
motivation,
rigor, however, whether the 60 million deaths figure is verifiable or not doesn't really affect the meat of the video's argument. People dying is tragic no matter the quantity. The more important figure in that respect is the claim that 94% of driving accidents are the result of human error. This statistic was included in Waymo's briefing to the 5 creators it recruited
I don't know
as
that's
part
that
of its
high.
PR campaign, but has also previously been used by Mueller to make the case for self-driving cars, in a video released in 2017, sponsored by BMW. Unfortunately, when we actually read the report which the figure is taken from, we find Mueller and Waymo's weaponization of it to support the rollout of driverless cars to once again be a gross misrepresentation. The statistic is drawn from a 2-page document released by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in February 2015. Drawing on a body of data surrounding car crashes gathered 8 years previously, the datasheet does indeed state that the critical reason for a crash was assigned to drivers in an estimated 2,046,000 crashes that comprised 94% of crashes at the national level. The following sentence, however, continues that in none of these cases was the assignment intended to blame the driver for causing the crash. But
that's exactly the type of group that I was just talking about, so it's a bit ironic that he brought that one up. But all their stats are actually saying is that people were in the cars when they crashed. Because if it's saying that it wasn't necessarily caused by the driver, then that just means that there was a person in the car when it crashed, which means a wheel could have fell off, or all sorts of things that's way beyond human control. Well, the driver's control at least. Maybe not the human that put the car together, but the person sitting in the car driving down the road. Or maybe it's just somebody who ran into them, and everybody's going to get counted in that accident, aren't they? You're not just going to count the people that caused the accident, you're going to count everybody involved.
This may seem confusing or contradictory at first, but Phil Koopman, an associate professor at Carnegie Mellon University who specialises in self-driving car safety, explains it well in a 2018 blog post. See, labelling the driver as the critical reason for a car crash does not necessarily mean that the crash took place due to negligence or malice. Instead, the critical reason for an accident is akin to the final point of failure leading up to the crash. Say, for example, someone is driving perfectly diligently along a rural road when they unknowingly pass a stop sign, which has been concealed by an overgrown bush. When they reach the upcoming crossroads, the road markings have also deteriorated to the point where the driver understandably believes it to be their right of way. They therefore continue straight ahead without stopping, at which point they collide with another vehicle. Now, if we wanted to assign blame for this crash, we'd probably say that it was the fault of whichever authority or body is in charge of trimming the hedge and maintaining the road markings. Nevertheless, the condition for assigning the critical...
Yeah, but like I say, when they do count those stats, they're not just going to count the car that ran into the other car, they're going to count everybody involved. Everybody's going to become part of that statistic. So some of them were just in their car, but they're still going to be injured as part of an accident. So they're going to be included. And that's one of the things that just make this type of thing, or those types of stats, inherently unreliable.
Reason in the NHTSA study was such that as long as there was some possibility that the driver could have seen the other vehicle approaching their side and reacted to avoid the crash, the driver was still marked down as the critical reason for the incident. In short, well, the 94%...
Yeah, but as part of theirs, they said that in many instances the driver wasn't even responsible. So, that makes it even worse still, doesn't it?
Figure does include some people who were drunk driving or asleep at the wheel. It also includes people whose sole failing was not quite being able to react sufficiently after suddenly finding themselves in a difficult and dangerous scenario. The overtone of this section of the Veritasium video is clear, that greater adoption of driverless cars has the potential...
Yeah, there is a bit of a caveat to that though, isn't there? Because there is no way that a human can process information as fast as a computer. Yeah, we do process information really, really fast, but the time from you seeing a car pull out on you to that thought getting through to your muscles enough to start pressing your leg down on the floor and your arms to start turning the steering wheel, I think a computer would probably accomplish that quite a bit quicker than a human. If it knew when to interpret those signals and when to do it, then that would be fantastic. It's the fact that it doesn't always know when to do it at the right time. That's why it's not a good thing. So it's not that anybody's saying that computers aren't fantastic at doing this sort of stuff. It's just that you've got to add all of these parts together to make a complete drive. We're not just on about it reacting in one scenario.
To reduce the number of road accidents in the United States by up to 94%.
Most of these errors are impossible for a machine to make. But if you have a vehicle that has, LiDAR and radar and 29 cameras, you're just not going to hit them.
It's also heavy on emotional manipulation.
Every year, when people are backing out of driveways or parking spaces, in the US, up to 200 people are killed, and it's frequently older people or children, the children of the drivers.
The problem is that the adoption of driverless cars wouldn't be a solution in anywhere close to all of these cases. In our example of the neglected crossroads, an overgrown hedge and lack of road markings would be just as much of a problem for an autonomous vehicle as it would be for a human being. From the heights of Muller's misleading 94%,
well, I'd say it'd probably actually be worse for the autonomous car because, the markings might be mostly rubbed out, but we might still just about be able to catch a bit of a shade or silhouette there, which might not be something that a camera could pick up. But I guess alternately, there might be, other light frequencies that are being reflected off those marks that aren't visible to us, but that a camera could pick up. So I guess there could be an argument for both. I suppose it depends on how the cameras are set up and what they're actually looking for. But generally, I think that I would trust a human's eyes over a camera.
Koopman suggests that autonomous vehicles might be able to cut fatalities in half if we can achieve parity with an average well-behaved human driver. As we'll see in the following section, that's still a big if, with driverless cars far less capable than Waymo and Muller imply. Furthermore, none of this takes into account the new risks and dangers that would undoubtedly accompany greater use of autonomous vehicles. In this section then, we again find a refusal to approach the topic at hand with the slightest degree of nuance. A non-sponsored video about driverless cars could have featured a really interesting conversation about what problems autonomous vehicles will solve and those they won't. Instead, Veritasium chooses sensationalism and misrepresentation. Of course, there's a chance that the misrepresented statistics in this section are largely the result of confirmation bias, of stumbling across a figure that supports the argument that Waymo has asked Veritasium to make, and simply not questioning it, rather than an active decision to leave out information that complicates their position. When it comes to the video's highly selective explanation of how the Waymo vehicles work, however, such excuses begin to seem much less conceivable.
Yeah, I think that if somebody really believes in a product like self-driving cars, and you really want people to be more receptive to it, then I can easily understand you trying to sell the product more than perhaps what you should do to get people more encouraged and fired up about it. Even if you were being sponsored by that person and you were still, innocently making the advert, I can see, you're leaning 5% towards the company or 10% towards the company because they're sponsoring you, and then another 5 or 10% towards it because you really believe in the product and you really want it to become a reality. But even with those things, these are all looking really, really dubious, aren't they? Now, the DNA one, I know without question that every single part of every single minute that I watched of it was completely false. Yeah, okay, they might have been doing the DNA tests and all the rest of it, but the natural, I've had this through the post, let's just go and chase it up and let's have a look, see how it works out. It might be helpful so that if we've got any diseases or anything that we don't know about yet, we can look out for our kids and all that level of it. It was all just scripted on half a dozen other big YouTube channels. Now this one we're just talking about the driverless cars because this is the particular video that he's picked up on, but even he mentioned at the beginning that he's come across quite a lot of other occasions when this type of thing's happening, and that's what's prompted him to make this video. Now I've seen it quite a few times, mainly the DNA one. I think that the reason why that one stands out is because it was such big channels and they are so generally scientifically based channels where you wouldn't for a moment consider that you was getting anything but the rounded truth out of them. Then that's what makes them, for me at least, stand out the most. But I know that I've seen it in other ways and stuff like that as well. But I didn't think for a second that it was an actual, real, genuine problem and that we're being used to consume this propaganda. And that these channels are passing it to us, making out that they're just pure, entertainment science channels, but essentially telling you the truth about everything that they're experiencing and learning and trying to portray to you, when that's just not the case. I think it's just so wrong on so many levels. Misinformation by omission, that's something that's used by quite a lot of companies when they're trying to get away with stuff that they know that they wouldn't get away with if they did tell you all of the facts. So if these are also included in this, then that's not going to be a good thing, is it?
To convince us that driverless cars are a safe and reliable technology, Veritasium's video is pretty light on technical explanation. In fact, it's not until 9 minutes and 16 seconds in that we're provided with any kind of overview of how Waymo's vehicles actually work. At this point, Muller gives us a brief tour of some of the systems through which the cars monitor their surroundings. We learn about the LiDAR system.
Up here in the very prominent top, there is a 360 LiDAR. So it can see all around the car. It can see.
We learn about its use of cameras.
There are 29 cameras around this vehicle, which gives you full 360 vision.
We also learn how it deals with emergency vehicles.
There is also a microphone up on top to listen to what's happening in the environment, and if there are sirens, then the car will pull over to the side of the road.
Just as a little side point here, thinking about all these cameras and microphones on top of the cars, I'm sure that everybody remembers a year or so, 2 years ago, about all the conspiracy and everything surrounding microphones in your TVs listening to you, and then it turned out that it was actually true. They had been programmed to kind of listen to what people were talking about, and then that information sold off to sales companies so they can direct ads towards particular groups. So, what started as a conspiracy turned out to be true. I'm not really into conspiracies much myself generally, but when they turn out to be true, then I pay a bit more attention. And then we've got cars not just surrounded in cameras, which are there for general safety of people running into you and stuff, but a lot more cameras and microphones and all sorts of other stuff. Yeah, I'm not sure what type of world that's moving us into. You think of cities with CCTV cameras around everywhere and how much people like or dislike being on cameras from that. If you then add that to every single car on the road, how's that going to lead us forwards? How is that going to be for normal people on the street every single day? How are you going to feel about that? In fact, add to the comment section what you think about that. It's not something we're going to have to worry about just yet, but how would you feel knowing that all of the cars all around you were indirectly spying on you? And knowing that these companies, they're not coy about taking that information and using it for themselves or selling it off. It's very rarely just for the use of the product, almost never just for the use of the product. We've certainly learned that in the past decade or two. But how do you feel about that? If that was the case, well, it's going to be the case eventually, but how do you feel about that?
That's it. As Waymo and Veritasium see it, that is all the information that one needs to understand how these cars work.
Oh, right, okay.
And as you can perhaps tell from my
turns out
tone,
they're not that complicated
that
after all.
is not true. You see, one goal of this video is to convince us that if it wasn't for technophobic politicians, negativistic NIMBYs and red tape-loving bureaucrats, you would be able to hire a Waymo taxi in major cities across the US. And for that argument to be truly convincing, we have to believe that if those cultural and political hurdles could be overcome, you could drop a Waymo car in New York or Tampa or Detroit or Denver and it would just work. As such, in his technical rundown, Muller suggests that the vehicles operate by simply monitoring the environment around them and making decisions based on what they find.
The way the LiDAR works is it shoots out invisible laser beams scanning around millions of times a second, and then it detects the reflection, and how long it takes to come back allows you to determine how far it is to that object. So what it's doing is like painting a 3D picture of the world.
This is certainly one very important aspect of how Waymo's vehicles work. The LiDAR and other sensors allow the cars to identify other vehicles, pedestrians, the colour of traffic lights, and other live aspects of a driving situation. Yet, what Muller completely fails to mention is that the cars also require highly detailed maps to be prepared for any area that they want to operate in.
Oh yeah, that's not going to be a problem, is it? Because I'm sure that none of us have ever had a problem with our sat-nav leading us the wrong direction, or trying to make us go the wrong way down a one-way street, or down a road that doesn't exist, or drive us off into a lake. I'm sure that no one's ever had that sort of problem. So that sounds like a really good way forwards.
As Waymo themselves describe it in their safety report, before our cars drive in any location, our team builds our own detailed, three-dimensional maps that highlight information such as road profiles, curbs and sidewalks, lane markers, crosswalks, traffic lights, stop signs, and other road features.
As long as no adjustments or construction or new roads are added or taken away from those areas, they'll be absolutely fine, I'm sure.
Rather than rely on GPS, the Waymo driver cross-references our pre-built maps with real-time sensor data to precisely determine their location on the road.
Yeah, it's that sensor data I think is the biggest problem, because yeah, the car is surrounded in all different types of sensors, cameras and so on. All of the information gets input. That all then leads to the car making a decision about all of the things around it, or making multiple decisions about the things around it and how it needs to proceed or not proceed. But every time it makes a decision or it gets a new piece of information which is continuous, then it has to make another thought, another assumption, and that leads to then another process, and it has to make another assumption or an action based on that again. So, like, I'm not really explaining it very well, but if you drive up towards a set of traffic lights and you pull it fairly close to the car in front, but not that close that they're going to roll back into you, but you're paying attention to the fact that they are fairly close, so you're indirectly watching to make sure they don't roll back before everybody goes to pull off, at the same time as you're watching the lights and you're watching the cars coming left and right, and then the lights change, you pay attention to how that car's pulling off and to all the things around you, and then you notice a cyclist coming up the inside. You're having to make decisions based on all of this real-time information being fed through to your brain. And human brains can process that, and a lot of the time we do end up tripping up and we have accidents. But the amount of accidents that we have, because our brains just can't process information fast enough, it's usually just down to just general error rather than that our brains can't keep up with it. But asking a car or some type of machine to keep up with all of that and to continuously do that for your entire journey, you're on about such colossal amounts of information and decisions that it's just such an incredible feat to try and accomplish. I think that trying to sell it as a done deal already is a pretty dubious act in the first place. So I'm surprised that even with whatever they were paid to, what Veritasium and all the others were paid to try and advertise this, I'm surprised that they tried to sell it quite as much as what they have.
In a similar mode to the earlier misrepresentation of Autoland systems then, what we find here is an inflation of the capabilities of Waymo's vehicles, whilst also refusing to mention significant human involvement in building, processing and verifying intricate and diligently labelled scans of every street the car will drive down. And this is before we...
But like I say as well, though, all of these maps and everything are based on how things are at that moment. But a week later they could have had some major roadworks because a sinkhole appeared or a drain blew up or anything. The chances of that map completely reflecting that entire area for more than a month, it's not really that realistic, is it? Because there's always going to be something happening in that area as far as construction goes.
Begin to take into account the team which monitor any Waymo journeys which are currently taking place, or the support teams which roam the city prepared to spring into action when things go awry. Without wanting to preempt my conclusion too much, we have here a perfect example of why we should be skeptical of supposedly educational creators handing over their platforms to companies like Waymo. Where a non-sponsored video might have given us a complete and balanced insight into how Waymo's vehicles work, Veritasium's deal with the company sees them leaving out vital information in order to make their sponsor look good. Geographical.
And that's the crux of what this entire video is about. I know it's a long-winded video, and I know you're kind of seeing two videos in one. We're one talking about the propaganda side of it, and at two we're also talking generally about the driverless cars and stuff. I didn't intend to go into the driverless cars part of it quite so much, but there's so much information and different odd things that's come up that we've kind of ended up having to discuss some of it. But the real crux of this is the amount of information and how rounded that information is that's been put out by Veritasium and all of the other groups. They're seen as hardline science entertainment channels. Now you got the word entertainment in there, and you've also got YouTube in there. So you know that these aren't meant as, you're not taking a school qualification in science. You're not expecting that type of level of fact and strict rigidity and that sort of stuff. But if they're a channel that only really give out genuine information, then you expect that all of the information you're being given is all the information that there is that's pertinent within the kind of the depth that they're going into that topic. And that's not what's happened here, is it? In fact, the information that they have given has been very, very, very dubious.
Limitations and a failure to mention them again become relevant in the penultimate section of the video. Prior to this, there is another vlog section featuring the hilarious car park incident mentioned earlier, and a discussion of the ethical questions surrounding whose life a driverless car should choose to save should a vehicle find itself forced to make a choice between hitting two people. Muller's argument here is incredibly weak, consisting of him just trying to reassure us that such events are rare and that we therefore shouldn't lose too much sleep over it.
The reality is that 99% of accidents aren't like that.
I hope it's sufficient to say in response that rare things still happen. In 2015, The Economist reported that the odds of an aeroplane crashing were 1 in 5.4 million. But as a society, we still dedicate significant resources to try to stop that from happening. Where geography once again becomes an issue is when Muller returns to trying to convince us that Waymo software is, to borrow the phrase the company loves so much they've trademarked, the world's most experienced driver. He does so partly through continuing his cringe-worthingly softball interview with the head of Waymo's ride-hailing operations. Perhaps the lowest moment in this interview sees Muller make the following suggestion.
If that's true, it means like every vehicle that's not on the road is kind of a worse situation. Do you know what I mean?
But he also throws a couple more statistics at us.
These vehicles have way more experience than any human driver because they've now accumulated data over 20 million miles of driving on public roads. If you were an average driver, you'd have to drive for 1,000 years to accumulate that sort of experience.
Waymo loves to quote this statistic in their promotional literature. What they seem less keen to reveal is exactly where these 20 million miles of driving took place. For
maybe they
the
drove to
video,
Pluto and back.
Refuses to mention that the reason that he filmed this video in the suburb.
And no, I don't know how far away Pluto is offhand. I was just saying it as a flippant comment before you bombard the comment section saying Pluto is not 20 million miles away. Well, actually 10 million miles away because I said there and back.
Of Phoenix, Arizona, is because that's the only place in the world where Waymo's taxi service operates. While in August 2021, the company began testing in San Francisco, a human safety driver is behind the wheel in every vehicle, and prospective passengers are forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. That's not to say that the vehicles have only driven in these two cities. The Waymo safety report claims that the cars have driven in more than 25 cities across 10 US states. Nevertheless, the proportion of those 10 million miles that have been driven in different places is highly significant. See, as Mahmoud Hikmet highlights in one of his videos about Waymo, the primary reason that the company is seeking to introduce its vehicles to new cities at the moment is because new environments bring new challenges.
These vehicles are under a test, and they're going to fail, they're going to run into edge cases. Some of them might seem really, really obvious, but it's really hard to account for all of those edge cases during initial testing. So what Waymo are hoping to achieve here in this public rollout is they're hoping to run into more of these edge cases.
In short, letting the car drive up and down the same roads again and again eventually has diminishing returns. It might be amazing at driving on those particular roads, but still terrible elsewhere. We see this with Waymo's vehicles in relation to the weather. Phoenix has pretty favourable conditions for driving. It is generally clear and bright. The safety report does stress that the vehicles have been tested in other conditions. From sunny Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah, that's a little bit like the cone scenario that I was talking about earlier when we was first seeing driverless cars drive around car parks through, cones being put out and that sort of stuff, and through GPS units plotted around. They could make it around the course and they did it with perfection, but that's all they could do. When you put them into unknown situations, then they just fell apart. They just couldn't do it. And that's pretty much what they're saying, isn't it? They want to try to expand their experience because the amount of driving that they've done around their limited area, they've kind of got to the end of that, so they want to start putting them out into other places, which is another reason why they're probably trying to sell it to the public.
To rainy Kirkland, Washington, across the snowy Upper Peninsula of Michigan, through Death Valley heat, and in foggy San Francisco. Nevertheless, it would seem the company is still not entirely confident in the vehicle's ability to operate in all weathers. A 2019 blog post by the company's chief safety officer revealed that Waymo's taxis are designed to come to a safe stop. under certain bad weather conditions, and a Morning Brew article from July 2021 highlighted that certain conditions require the reintroduction of safety drivers behind the wheel. As with the statistics suggesting that 94% of accidents are the result of driver error, then, while the 20 million mile figure might appear to be a slam dunk in favour of allowing Waymo carte blanche to launch a taxi service in every city in the world, the truth is far more complicated. And, as we've come to expect from Veritasium in this video, none of those crucial questions are asked. Instead, as in the case of Waymo vehicles requiring highly detailed, human-verified maps of any roads that they drive on, and that of the taxis being geofenced into a small area of Phoenix, the sponsorship deal with Waymo ensures that the video declines the opportunity to properly educate us about this technology in favour of leaving out any information which shows the company's vehicles to be anything less than perfect. Perhaps the most
But the other thing is as well, now we're highlighting, or he's highlighting, and indirectly I'm highlighting, this one particular topic that's obviously very dubious with how it's been done. But it does raise the question, how many other times has this happened? And with how many other big YouTubers? You know, people where you actually believe what it is that they're saying because you've had no reason to ever doubt them before. Is it a really big thing?
Frustrating thing about the multitude of omissions and misrepresentations contained within this video is that admitting that the technology still has limits wouldn't make it much less impressive. While Mueller hams up his enjoyment of being in the Waymo vehicle a bit, I can't imagine it would be anything but really, really cool to ride in one of these cars. They are an impressive feat of engineering. That being said, Mueller rounds his video up by predicting some of the ways in which driverless cars might change the world.
Transportation will get cheaper. Think of all the wasted value in the cars that spend over 95% of their time parked. We can regain a bunch of time and feel happier because commuting and being stuck in traffic sucks. We can reduce traffic because vehicles will have better awareness of each other.
As I bring this video to a close, as well as wrapping up my points about the devastating effect corporate sponsorships have the potential to have on educational YouTube, I want to ask a few questions about whether driverless cars would really have the impact that Mueller claims, or whether there might be better alternatives to these problems already in existence. There's an interesting assumption which goes completely unacknowledged. It's the assumption that self-driving cars are the future of transport, with the only uncertainty being when they will become a viable option for replacing human-driven cars as the dominant mode of transit in the global north. In his 2018 book, Winners Take All, Anand Giridharadas suggests that in recent years, technology companies have often used the circulation of such limited visions of the future as a key rhetorical tactic. He writes that, in Silicon Valley, prediction has become a popular way of fighting for a particular future while claiming merely to be describing what has yet to occur. The advantages of doing so are evident throughout this Veritasium video. By painting driverless cars as the only and inevitable future, you can portray anyone who is even mildly skeptical as simply a ratchety old fuddy-duddy who is standing in the way of progress. Even assuming that the present flaws in autonomous vehicle technology can be ironed out, and there is nothing to say that they can't be, it's highly unlikely that they would solve many of the problems that Mueller suggests they would. The idea that driverless cars would reduce congestion is a complete non-starter. Assuming people otherwise maintain the same habits, a car driven by a machine takes up the same amount of road space as one driven by a person. The suggestion that we could reclaim the wasted value residing in the 95% of time that the average car spends parked.
I think that automated cars would be a bit more effective at going through junctions and stuff, though, wouldn't they? I think that taking away those small delays where people are slow to react going around corners or pulling off from junctions and staying at a reasonable distance behind other cars, I think that those we're only on about very small amounts of time for each one, but collectively I think that they would add up, and I think that that would make an improvement for the amount of cars or the amount of time it takes to get from one place to another on the roads. Whether it would be enough to really act as the entire selling point for self-driving cars, no, not at all. And all you need is for one thing to go wrong and it blocks the whole road and you've lost all of those gains anyway. But I think that if everything worked in a perfect sort of system, then it probably would save some time.
Parked is another excellent example of lying with statistics. It ignores the fact that much of that 95% is the night time, or the middle of the day when people are working. For lots of people, the 5% of the time in which they need their cars is the same 5% of the time that everyone else is using their cars.
Yeah,
Finally,
exactly.
whether autonomous cars would make getting around cheaper is just complete guesswork. Whilst the lack of a driver might reduce costs for
I think the only way that it would reduce cost is because it would probably drive a little bit more efficiently than what the average person does. But I think the average person could drive more efficiently if they wanted to. It's just that we don't want to. We like driving the way that we do. And so a car that takes that control away from us, I'm not sure that that will be a positive thing.
For taxi companies such as Waymo, there's nothing to say that they would pass those savings on to customers.
Oh,
The
no, they
argument
wouldn't.
that Veritasium makes for driverless cars here is then pretty poor. If we take off the Waymo-sponsored blinkers, which consider autonomous vehicles to be the only possible future of transportation for a moment, however, we find that the problems highlighted make a fantastic argument for another solution: public transport. These problems of congestion, of the wasted value, both of the time that people spend driving and of everyone having their own personal vehicle that they only use 5% of the time, and finally of cost, these are all problems which would be much better addressed by well-funded, publicly owned, integrated mass transit systems. The vehicles could even be autonomous if you really want them to be. I couldn't find a single sponsored video similar to those paid for by Waymo, but making the case for the introduction of more usable public transport points us towards the larger problem that the existence of videos like this one by Veritasium highlights. On the one hand, what we have here is simply a bad educational video. At every opportunity, Veritasium chooses making Waymo look good over actually teaching us anything useful about driverless cars. In fact, in its multitude misrepresentations and omissions of vital details, I think it's more than fair to call this misinformation. As I said at the very beginning of this video, it is a perfect example of why we should be highly skeptical of creators who are willing to hand over their platforms to corporate sponsors in this way. Nevertheless, it's also worth thinking about what effect these practices, particularly by supposedly educational channels, might have on our public discourse more broadly. Rightly or wrongly, YouTube has become a platform to which people flock, not only for entertainment, but for education, and to seek out potential responses to the various social and political challenges facing our world. As is the case with this set of videos sponsored by Waymo.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about earlier. You don't expect that you're taking some type of qualification when you're trying to learn something from YouTube, but people do see it as a way to learn about stuff, and we trust the information that we're seeing on there if it's from a YouTuber that we believe that we can trust. If it's just a video out there and it's talking about there's a man on Mars and they've got a photo of it or something like that, then you're going to be a bit skeptical. But if it's from somebody that's a science channel, an educational channel, and they've been out for a lot of years, they've put out thousands of videos, and you've never had a reason to doubt anything that they've said before, and you've always been given the full impression that you've been given all of the information, not just one side of an argument to make a company look good. It's just a really, really bad thing, isn't it, when corporations are infiltrating this type of video. Everybody knows that we're always very skeptical of those in charge of our politics because companies infiltrate them through different systems and different methods, underhand systems and methods, and those lead to governments and decisions being made around policies that benefit large organisations and corporations rather than, well, really what's good for the people. I think that's the most politically correct way that I can try and put backhanders. But what we don't expect is for that to have crept into YouTube videos from groups that we once thought that we could trust. And it's going to call into question every time you see a YouTuber that's then saying that they're sponsored by a video. Before we thought, well, yeah, they're sponsored by it. Maybe they're going to lean a little bit towards the sponsor because you'd expect that general courtesy if nothing else. But now we're going to be really, really questioning it, aren't we? It is really damaging, not just because of the level of information being given, but also because of how it's broken that system, hasn't it?
Companies, corporate lobby groups and billionaires are increasingly using sponsorship deals to ensure that the answers that people find on the platform are amenable to their interests. Actual solutions which serve everyone, such as in this case public transport, tend not to have anyone willing to bankroll sponsored videos on their behalf. We might not be able to change that, but we can at least become attuned to recognising and critiquing these corporate propaganda pieces. Thank you so much for watching this video.
Okay, he's going to be leaving his video there, and the link to his video is in the description like always. So what do you think about what you've heard? Do you believe that propaganda has made its way into a lot of the main YouTube channels? Now, you hear the word propaganda and you think about governments, but really propaganda in its kind of general sense in today's society is about companies. Companies spreading misinformation to either trash a competitor or to make their product more widely accepted or more popular so that people buy it. I think that when you have a trusted source, a group that you believe is giving out a balanced argument, like a news group to some extent, and then you find out that you are getting fake news, then it completely undermines that entire system. Who now watches the news and trusts every word that they're being told? You go back 10 years, maybe 20 years. I don't think you need to go back that far. I think just 10 years ago even. If you saw something on the news, would you have questioned that they were lying to you in any sort of way? But then look at all of the fake news that came out, all of the lies. And so now we no longer trust anything that we're being told by the news groups. We're not saying that YouTube channels are being run by priests or nuns or anything like that. We're not saying that it's all for the betterment of humanity. We're not trying to claim that at all. Yeah, people are making channels because they're trying to promote themselves, promote the product, or because they like making videos, or they're doing it as a business, or a million and one reasons why people make YouTube videos and why people have channels. But when you put yourself out as an educational channel or a science channel, then the information that you give out, you either are blatant about the fact that you don't always tell the truth, you make it into a comic part of the channel, or you don't. If you're making out that the information that you're giving is all of the information that there is to know within the depth of the discussion or video that you're going into, then that should be all there is to it. And if it's a new video, a new channel, then you might just think, well, I'm not sure I really trust this. But then when it's a long-standing channel, then I think that it's all the worse, isn't it? Because they've spent a lot of years building credibility for being a pretty good, truthful science channel, giving an all-round set of information on whatever topic they're covering, just the same as Smarter Every Day. But then when you find out that actually they're just selling out, or it appears that they're selling out to companies, and really all they're doing is just putting very long adverts on to advertise their product, a company's product, and that it's no different to them just outright lying to you, is it? Maybe that sounds a bit harsh. Maybe it's not quite that bad. Maybe you don't see it like that. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure what to think about it. I know that I've not watched a couple of the channels since I saw it happen, because I just thought it was outrageous. If they'd said and been honest about why they were doing the video, and that it was just a promotion being paid by it, and they thought, yeah, why not? We'd like to know that information, then that's fine. Nobody cares. But when they make out that something's going on and it's not, and you know it's just some underhanded thing that's happened, then I think that completely changes it. That makes you just no longer want to watch them or their channel. And so I think it's really damaging for the people that's doing it, as much as our trust in those people. But when you start to not be able to trust the bigger groups, then it makes you not trust any of the groups. And so you know that they've started something that, yeah, maybe it can be nipped in the bud, and maybe we can start rolling back on it, and so it doesn't get worse. Or it's going to continue to happen, and then all of those science channels or everything, the way you've taken actual information from YouTube, you're going to always feel like you can never really actually trust that information. And I think that that's a really bad thing, because people are quite reliant on YouTube now for gaining all sorts of information. They're a lot more ready to go to YouTube to gain information than any other format, I think. Which, okay, that in itself is probably a pretty sad state of affairs, but that's how it is. And it is really easy to consume information using YouTube. That's why we all do it. It's easy, it's fun, and it's relaxing. We can learn something, be entertained, and do nothing all at the same time. Although, speaking of sponsors, if you do want to sponsor one of our channels, then we'll be quite happy to accept your sponsorship. You can find our contact details on our channel, and I'm sure that we would be very kind towards your product, but we would only be telling the truth, unless you was also paying us in donuts, in which case we would say whatever you like. But no, seriously though, tell me what you think about this. How do you feel, and what do you think its impact is going to be on how you look at videos in the future? And what do you think that the overall impact is towards YouTube? Do you think it's now changed things? Or do you think it's just take it in our stride, it's just one of them things? It's just the way things are. It's life. Let us know in the comment section what you think. I know this has been a really long video, and that's something we did try to avoid, but there's no way to be able to get everything in without it being this long, unfortunately. So if you have stuck with us this long, then thank you for watching all the way through. Your perseverance is much appreciated. If you have enjoyed the video, then click like, and please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching.